I was asked to talk about the purpose of Mondoweiss, which sounds to me a little bit like trying to justify your existence, which is a little scary. But so I'm going to talk about something slightly different, but clearly related. And it's really going to be sort of where the web, or where the internet fits into all of this. And in a lot of ways, I think it's we just had a perfect introduction in seeing how horrible the mainstream coverage of this issue is. A little bit of history about the website. Like you just heard, I co-edited the website with a journalist named Philip Weiss. Phil actually started Mondoweiss when he was a staff reporter at the New York Observer, the newspaper you might know in New York. And it was just a blog that he was given as a writer there, and he was able to write about anything he wanted. So if you look back to the early days of Mondoweiss, it was about his dogs, and about TV shows he likes, and what he had for lunch. And then over time, and this was a lot tied up with the war in Iraq, he was getting more and more interested in Palestine. He started writing more about Palestine, and writing about the American Jewish community, about the neoconservatives, about what the role of our community was in sort of preparing the grounds for war. And the more and more he started writing about Palestine, the less and less his editors were comfortable, and finally he was more or less fired from his job for it. Although he was able to keep his website, and he had started it in 2006. I joined him in 2008. I should say that my background as a journalist is that I was on my high school newspaper. But that before I started working with Phil, I was working in the NGO world, working for the American Friends Service Committee, which some of you might know, it's a Quaker organization. I was working for them in Philadelphia and moved on to work with Phil. And there's really sort of 3 points I would want to make about the purpose of Mondoweiss, or I would say the purpose of the web in our discussion. 3 things that I think we do that helps sort of combat what we just saw. The first is that through the web, we're able to introduce new voices to the discussion. Voices that you don't commonly, even in the good articles up there, you don't commonly get to hear. Voices from critics here in the US, critics in Israel, and most certainly almost any Palestinians on the ground who are living through what we're discussing. One of the effects that I think introducing those voices does is help to shift the discourse, not only in terms of trying to respond to, say, what the State Department is saying, but starting to put our own understanding of the conflict and our own understanding of the solutions. When I first started working with Phil, he and I would write everything. Now, if you follow the site, you'll find that there are some days where he and I don't write anything. I mean, we've gone from he and I writing everything to we have close to 350 contributors now. Really from all over the world, and we really try to focus in Palestine. And I actually just want to read one short piece from a series that we did last December of writers in Gaza reflecting on the 2-year anniversary of Castled. And this is a piece that was written by a young woman who was, at the time she wrote this, was 17 years old, a high school student. Her name's Roland Yaki. It's called From Beneath. I didn't even know if my eyes were open. After the big mess, everything seemed so calm. I could sense the dust covering my face. It was the only part of me I could feel. I could feel my breath hitting one of the bricks of my room's floor. Air found its way through everything, surrounding my body. Silence was all I could hear. My arms were trapped somewhere under the wooden edges of my bed. My toes, my legs, my hair were all jailed and penalized not to move. I was afraid. I waited and waited, trying to recall all the joyful events in my life as my mother once advised me to do when I was afraid, though they were few. My elder brother's big wedding. My grandmother coming home from Hajj and bringing me a singing doll. The last Eid when I got my biggest hidayah ever. My mother bringing home a new baby after me. I actually wondered if that was a happy event for me, but I could certainly see the joy in my parents' face as they were looking at the little thing. My breath firmly came back to my face, touching it as if to comfort me and tell me that everything would be okay. But a minute later, I started crying. It was only then that I realized my eyes were closed, because I could feel my wet eyelashes. It did not matter, opening them, closing them, they were thoroughly the same. I cried so much that the tears mixed with the dust on my face, and I could feel the mud at the edges of my face. I must have been bleeding, since a killing pain started growing in my chest, and growing as I was weeping harder and harder. I tried to stop in order to stop the pain. After only one muscle, I found out that something very sharp, extremely strong, was calmly standing through my skin. I stopped crying. I waited. I bled. The ability to be able to publish pieces like that, which, honestly, we just put out a call over Twitter, over a few other sites, just asking for things, and this piece showed up in our inbox. It really kind of justified the entire website to me. To be able to get voices like that out to an audience that felt, well, I think that is much larger an audience than I was ever able to reach when I was working at the American Print Service Committee, through some of the more traditional type of NGO work that we sometimes do. So doing that work, I think, is one of the really important roles that Mondoweiss, but really the web is able to play. I think another one, and we've heard a little bit about this already, is holding both our news agencies but our news makers accountable. Earlier when Leila told the story about the letter that Youssef wrote that she posted on the website and ended up getting delivered to the Israeli Minister of Defense as a pretty extreme example. But really the sort of the wall that I think used to exist much more strongly between the mainstream media and the people who read it, or its critics, I think is coming down in part because of the internet. One recent example, and this is sort of a kind of a multi-stage process we're seeing, is you might know Ethan Bronner, who is the Jerusalem bureau chief for the New York Times. And he's recently been caught up in a number of different scandals. The first one being that he was a member of a speakers bureau that was being run by a settler. The second one being that he was supposed to appear actually tomorrow night at the 92nd Street Y in New York, speak on a panel hosted by an organization that is trying to foment a war in Iran. And in both of these cases, it was journalists working solely on the web who uncovered these issues, brought it to the attention, started, informal, but I think effective campaigns trying to pressure the Times to end this practice. And in both cases, they were successful. Both being able to deal directly with the New York Times through the Ombudsman's office over Twitter, through the web and over email, and in the case of tomorrow's event through the 92nd Street Y directly. There's these points of pressure that I think have always existed. You've always been able to write a letter to the editor, but I think there's a lot of different ways that we're able to use these tools now as activists or journalists that didn't exist before. And then, sort of lastly, and I think that this is another really important role that I see us playing, although it might seem out of place in an event like this, is the sense of community that we're able to build over the web. I think very few, and I've had a chance to travel around the US a lot, at least, and speak about this issue. I think very few places have conferences like today. I think this is a really special opportunity, not only to be able to come and hear speakers like you're hearing, maybe myself not included, but to meet each other. Hopefully there are people here today who don't know the other people here and are now going to get involved in the really important work that Tree of Life is doing. But very often we'll get emails into the website from people who, I don't even know where they might be, but wherever they are, they don't know another person who thinks the way that they do on this issue. And as we all know, we've all probably been in that situation, it's very easy to feel like you're crazy when you're in that environment. But they're able to come to our website or other websites and not only get news and see that that there are other people who share their interests, but they're actually able to engage in conversation and debate, meet like-minded people, and join a much larger community, not only to get information, but to take action. I think that is a tool that the web gives us, both as organizations or as journalists, that is really unique and extremely powerful, and I think it's one of the reasons that our site continues to grow. I mean, oftentimes I'll say that, you know, the movement to try to change U.S. foreign policy in Israel-Palestine is our beat. And we don't really help drive that movement at all. I really don't think so, but our site is a reflection of that movement. When I first started with Mondoweiss in 2008, a typical day, we would get about 3,000 visitors, which at that time struck me as pretty amazing. It felt like a lot of people. Today, on an average day, when things aren't necessarily, you know, in the news, we get about 15,000. That is a monumental growth in only the past 3 years, and this is the last 3 years where we've seen, you know, Operation Cast led the war in Gaza. We've seen the flotillas. We've seen this issue really continue to enter the consciousness of people around the country, and because they know they can't go to the New York Times to get their news, they're looking in other places. They're not only looking on the web, but they're looking to events in their community as well. And I think our website is a reflection of that. I hope it continues to grow because it means the movement is continuing to grow. And so I would just thank you for having me and just look forward to all the incredible work that comes out of this.